Shots fired on the rooftop. An assault in progress at Acer Plaza. 10-4 dispatcher. Verify address.
It's Acer Plaza. Repeat, Acer Plaza.
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.
Those are the first words of Max Payne, and I still remember the chills they gave me when I first played it 20 years ago. At the time, I didn't fully understand the noir-style storytelling or the raw pain driving Max's story. I was just a kid sneaking past the age rating to play a game unlike anything else I had seen before. Mind you, my comparisons at the time were like Crash Bandicoot and Pokemon Red or something. The simple, cheerful soundtracks were swapped for these haunting melodies and Max's brooding narration. It felt different. It felt real. And now, 2 decades later, I think I can finally put into words why this game feels just so unforgettable. So let me show you. The early 2000s were a wild time in gaming, to say the least. Studios weren't run by corporate black suits looking at every game as a potential cash cow to milk dry with battle passes or microtransactions. No. It truly was a time of throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. And sometimes what stuck gave us masterpieces like Elder Scrolls Morrowind, Resident Evil 4, and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Games that weren't just groundbreaking but defined genres for years to come. But game developers in this time weren't just chasing perfection. They weren't afraid to get weird in their quest to push boundaries. Katamari Damacy let you roll up everything in sight, from pencils to planets, into a giant sticky ball. Blood Rain brought us a hypersexualized vampire protagonist gleefully slicing through baddies. And Conker's Bad Fur Day mashed cartoon visuals with crude humor, culminating in a boss fight against a literal opera-singing pile of shit. Some of you might be too young to remember, but this was also the time when games weren't just creative. They were bold enough to mock you for quitting.
Credits. You think you're done, huh?
But Max Payne was different. It wasn't quirky or weird. It didn't wink at the player or break the fourth wall to make you laugh. Well, we'll get back to that later. Instead, it dragged you into this darkness and refused to let go.
Michelle!
No!
This scene was the first, but not the last, to give me nightmares as a kid. Max Payne's journey starts with his flashback to 3 years ago, when he arrives home to find his wife and daughter not just murdered. He gets to hear their last screams and experience what it means to be just a few seconds too late in the most tragic way possible.
Freeze! NYPD, drop it!
Coming! It's gonna stop!
No, please God, no.
This is also the tutorial of the game, by the way. While you're learning the controls, Max is losing everything. His family, his home, and any sense of future he thought he had. The world shifts from color to monochrome, and so does Max's life. From that moment on, his story is fueled by one thing and one thing only: revenge. But what makes Max Payne so gripping isn't just the tragedy, it's how it pulls you into Max's head. Classic noir stories like Chandler's The Big Sleep or films like Double Indemnity are all about flawed characters trapped in cycles of self-destruction. They make bad decisions for bad reasons, and even when they win, it feels like they lose. That's Max in a nutshell, but what sets him apart is how the game lets you live his grief. Take Max's monologues. They're the kind of lines that would sound cringy in lesser hands. Stuff like,
The sun went down with practiced bravado. Twilight crawled across the sky, laden with foreboding.
But in Max Payne, they're perfect. They don't just set the tone, they make you feel the weight of his despair. You're not just watching Max spiral, you're spiraling with him, especially during the nightmare sequences in the game.
I really love to watch cartoons. Captain Baseball Bat Boy's my favorite.
These moments are where the game stops being subtle and cranks the existential dread up to 11. Blood-soaked hallways that lead nowhere, ghostly cries of Max's wife echoing in the dark, twisted, fragmented memories of the family Max couldn't save. These aren't just dream sequences, they're a prison, a loop of guilt and regret that Max can never escape. Basically, Max Payne takes all the classic noir tropes and strips away any glamour. Max doesn't get the clever, almost romanticized self-destruction of someone like Sam Spade. He gets dragged through the mud, shot at, beaten, and left to bleed out in the cold. His world isn't glamorous, it's cruel. And yet somehow you can't help but root for him, even when you know he's doomed. And that's the magic of Max Payne. It takes a character who's broken, a man consumed by vengeance, barely clinging to his sanity, and makes you care. Not because he's a hero, but because deep down you understand. You get it. You have felt loss in your life. Like when you said goodbye to a loved one for the last time. You have stayed awake till 2 AM, replaying an argument with your best friend in your head, wishing you've said something, anything differently. And you've carried anger so heavy that it burned through the people around you, even the ones who were just trying to help. Max's story isn't just about revenge. It's about the weight of those moments, the ones that break you and remind you how fragile we are.
The nightmare was always the same. Violent shapes moving in darkness, old and ugly. The killer's mad laughter was a riddle filled with wicked innuendo.
Of course, a big part of what makes Max Payne so memorable isn't just the story, it's how the story is told. Most games of this era usually used fully rendered cutscenes to show off their fancy new tech. Keep in mind we're talking about early 2000s here, a time when quote-unquote state-of-the-art could mean clunky animations and wooden facial expressions, okay? Thankfully, thanks to the writer Sam Lake, Max Payne went in a completely different direction. Instead of bombarding you with flashy cinematics, it presented its story as a series of graphic novel panels, complete with gritty, noir-style visuals and narration. Each panel was created by taking photos of the cast and locations, then applying heavy filters and stylized effects to transform them into this shadow-drenched comic book frames. The result was something raw and unique, a world that felt grounded in reality, but heightened by its noir aesthetic. This approach didn't just give the game a timeless quality, it also gave Remedy Entertainment incredible flexibility during development. Changes didn't mean scrapping an entire cutscene and starting over. They could simply swap out panels, adjust their order, or add entirely new moments of dialogue without missing a beat. And the beauty of this approach is also how it mirrors Max's own emotional state. Graphic novels inherently create a layer of distance between the reader and the story. You're not watching events unfold in real time, you're piecing them together, frame by frame, like you're reading Max's shattered memories. It's fragmented, it's detached, and it's perfect for a protagonist who spends the entire game teetering on the edge of reality.
Collecting evidence had gotten old a few hundred bullets back. I was already so far past the point of no return I couldn't even remember what it looked like when I had passed it.
But what makes it all come together is Max's voiceover. It's poetic, over the top, and completely soaked in that noir flavor. But somehow, it never feels out of place.
There was nothing I could do. He was dead. I could tell by the empty, accusing stare of his eyes.
On paper, lines like that should make you roll your eyes. But in Max Payne, they just hit right. And what's even more interesting is how these graphic novel sequences play into the game's broader themes. Max narrates his story like he's reading from a pulp detective novel, and there's a reason for that. It's not just because the developers wanted to lean more into noir tropes, it's because Max himself is detached from his own life. His narration isn't just for us, it's for him. It's how he copes. By turning his pain into a story, Max creates a distance between himself and the horrors he's lived through. It's not his wife and child that were murdered. It's the wife and child of some tragic anti-hero in a gritty noir novel. That layer of detachment makes his narration feel both poetic and heartbreaking, like he's rewriting his own trauma just to survive. This entire game design package of comic panels, noir style, and the narration made Max Payne not just a standout in its time, it made it timeless. Even playing it now, almost a quarter of a century later, those graphic novel sequences still feel unique, like a perfect marriage of style and substance. They made sure the story hit just as hard as the gameplay, because while the gunfights were chaotic and thrilling, it's those quiet, haunting panels of Max's narration that you end up remembering years later.
I woke up in a bad dream. My head felt 2 sizes too small for my brain.
Max Payne. I envy your name.
And the killer was smiling.
Pleased to meet you. I'm Frankie the Bat Niagara.
Niagara, as in you cry a lot? He had a baseball bat and I was tied to a chair. Pissing him off was the smart thing to do.
If the graphic novel panels let you live inside Max's broken psyche, then Bullet Time was how Max Payne let you control that chaos, or at least made you feel like you could. Back in 2001, Bullet Time was groundbreaking, slowing down time to dive through the air, dodging bullets like a one-man action movie. It was the kind of thing that made you sit up and think, wait, games can do this? And sure, people like to point to The Matrix when talking about bullet time action, but contrary to the popular belief, Max Payne wasn't copying Neo. The game was already in development by the time Matrix hit the theaters. Instead, Max Payne was heavily inspired by over-the-top gunfights of John Woo films, like The Killer or Hard Boiled. Those movies turned gunplay into an art form. Slow-motion dives, dual-wielded pistols, and shootouts that felt more like dances than battles. Remedy took that aesthetic and asked, what if we made a game that felt like that? And the result was Bullet Time, a mechanic that wasn't just cool, but revolutionary at the time. But Bullet Time wasn't just a flashy gimmick to sell copies. The way I see it, it was a reflection of Max's desperate need to take control in a world where everything was falling apart. After all, Max is a character defined by chaos. His life has been ripped to shreds, his family is gone, and every step he takes only drags him deeper into a world of violence and bloodshed. But in Bullet Time, everything slows down. For a few brief moments, Max has the upper hand. He's not just reacting, he's in control. The brilliance of this mechanic is what makes you feel like Max. You're not just playing as him, you're experiencing what it's like to be a man so desperate for control that he bends the time itself to his will. It's a power fantasy, sure, but it's also deeply tragic. Because no matter how many slow motion dives you pull off, no matter how many enemies you take down, you know it's not enough. It can't bring back his family, it can't fix what's broken, and the game makes sure you feel that. Every time Bullet Time wears off, you're thrown right back into the chaos. The bullets don't stop coming, the enemies don't stop swarming, and Max, he doesn't stop falling apart. It's this tension, this constant push and pull between control and chaos. That's what makes Max Payne so unique.
You piece together a jigsaw and the final picture is you finishing that same puzzle. A mad, green-eyed killer standing behind you. An urban legend come true. The Project Valhalla test subjects had been the mad junkies who had murdered my loved ones. The rest was simple body count math. It all pointed to her. Ms. Valkyr. The factory went up in a fiery inferno behind me. All my leads were dead, turned to smoke and dust. I'd lost my way. I hadn't slept in a million years.
While games often give you a tragic backstory as a springboard for the hero to save the day, Max Payne does the opposite. This isn't a story about saving anything, or anyone. You already have lost. And it's the nightmare sequences that truly hammer home Max's grief and humanity, or what's left of it. These aren't your standard creepy dream levels, no. These are brutal, gut-wrenching trips into Max's psyche, each one forcing you to confront his deepest fears and regrets. Arguably, the Blood Maze level is the one that every single Max Payne player remembers. You're walking a thin, winding path made of blood, surrounded by darkness, with only the distant cries of Max's infant daughter to guide you. You frequently fall off the line when running or jumping, or hit a dead end and have to backtrack, all while the baby's screams in your ear grow louder and louder and more agonizing. To say it's frustrating and disorienting is an understatement. But that's the point. The Blood Maze is a metaphor for Max's guilt. He's chasing something he can never reach, running in circles inside a nightmare he can't escape. No matter how quickly Max gets through the maze, he'll never make it in time to save his daughter.
No, please God, no.
There's also a nightmare where Max sees himself killing his wife. It's not subtle, but it doesn't need to be. It's a raw, unfiltered look at how much Max blames himself for what happened. His guilt is so overwhelming that in his own mind, he becomes the villain. And I've seen some fan theories that Max was actually the killer, high on Valkyr drug at the time, and that this explains how he survives the lethal dose of V later on in the story. While it's a fascinating theory, I don't think it fully lines up. For example, another explanation could be that Max surviving the overdose is right there in the gameplay itself. Painkillers. Throughout the game, Max constantly takes them to regenerate his health, and since he's been chasing this case down for 3 years, it's safe to assume he's built up a near superhuman resistance to certain drugs. But back to the point. These nightmare sequences aren't just there to pad out the runtime or give you a break from the action. They're there to make you feel the full weight of Max's trauma. They're slow, uncomfortable, even frustrating, to make you feel like you're the one about to lose it. In the action scenes, you're a force of nature, diving through the air in slow motion, taking down enemies with precision. But in Max's dreams, all that power is stripped away. You're not a hero. You're not even a survivor. You're just a man drowning in his own guilt.
Max, something happened at the office today. A strange memo. Something about Vikings.
Honey, I gotta run. You can tell me all about it this evening.
Have a nice day, darling.
The bullet holes were rubies on her chest, blood glowing on her ivory skin. She was so beautiful. The killer was smiling.
The flesh of fallen angels.
But as revolutionary as Max Payne was, it wasn't without its flaws. No game is perfect, and there are aspects of the game that are just as frustrating now as they were when I first played it in the early 2000s. One of the most obvious issues lies in the gameplay variety, or rather the lack of it. For all its innovation with bullet time, Max Payne often feels like it's asking you to do the same thing over and over again. Enter a room, dive in slow motion, shoot a group of enemies, rinse and repeat. It's undeniably fun, but after a while the combat starts to feel repetitive, especially in the later levels where the enemy encounters become less about reacting and more about memorizing what comes next. And that leads me to perhaps the most frustrating flaw of what I like to call the bullshit you're meant to die moments. You turn a corner or step into a room only to be instantly gunned down by an enemy who's clearly been camping there, waiting for you to show up like some sadistic surprise party. There's no way to anticipate it or react to it in the moment. And now, because of course you didn't quick save right before that spot, you're dead and back to the last save you go. So what do you do next time? You walk in, grenade in hand, and chuck it towards the location where you died last time, like you're some psychic, or maybe you can just smell where the next enemy is. It's the gaming equivalent of stepping on a rake, then going back to launch it into orbit just to make sure it doesn't happen again. This just sucks. It takes the momentum right out of the experience. And this frustration is made worse by the lack of autosaves. If you forgot to save manually and got killed, well, tough titty. You're going back to the start of the level. After a while, you develop muscle memory for hitting quick save after every fight. It's almost meditative in a way. Every fight becomes a little victory, punctuated by the comforting press of F5. But it's also a stark reminder of how spoiled we've become by modern gaming conveniences like autosaves or yellow paint guiding you through every level. In Max Payne, it felt more like the game was your big brother who didn't care if you got a bit hurt. That said, one thing I do appreciate about this old school design is how it forces you to play smarter, not harder. For all the advantage bullet time gives Max, he's not some invincible action hero. A close-range shotgun blast will drop you just as quickly as it drops an enemy. It keeps the tension high and makes every encounter feel like a life or death situation where you barely survive. And while weapon inaccuracy might sound like another headache, I actually didn't find it annoying. For those unfamiliar, or if you forgot, aiming the reticle of your gun in Max Payne doesn't guarantee a hit. It's more like a suggestion. Your bullets will fly somewhere in that general direction, but not necessarily on the target. It's a mechanic that could easily frustrate, but here it adds to the chaos and unpredictability of gunfights. It reminds you that Max isn't a sharpshooter. He's just a guy with a vendetta, and usually high on pain meds. Overall, these flaws don't diminish Max Payne's legacy. I would say they highlight its ambition instead. Remedy clearly was working within the constraints of the technology and resources of the time, but they weren't afraid to push boundaries. For every repetitive shootout, bullshit ambush, or clunky nightmare puzzle, there's a moment of brilliance that makes you forgive its shortcomings. Because at the end of the day, Max Payne wasn't trying to be perfect, he was trying to be bold.
The bad trip had put me in a crazy mood, adrenaline pumping through my aching veins. Staggering on the mill roof in ice and snow and wild wind, I was a ninja. My kung fu was strong. I wasn't kidding anybody. At best, I was Superman on Kryptonite about to fall through a skylight, down to where it was all going down.
To fully appreciate Max Payne, you have to understand the people behind it a bit more. Remedy Entertainment wasn't some big, established studio with unlimited resources. It was a small Finnish team with an ambition in a time where big game titles only came from 3 countries primarily: US, Japan and the UK. They were punching well above their weight class, but that didn't stop the people at Remedy to create a title that would put their country on the map. They weren't afraid to experiment and draw inspiration from all over the place, be it John Woo's cinematic gunfights, Hong Kong action cinema, graphic novels, or classic noir films. And instead of just copying these influences, Remedy stitched them together into something uniquely their own. I mean, just look at how they did the 4th wall break in this game.
The weird piece of paper looked dangerous. There was something disturbingly familiar about the letter before me. The handwriting was all pretty curves.
You're in a computer game, Max.
The truth was a burning green crack through my brain, weapon statistics hanging in the air glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, endless repetition of the act of shooting, time slowing down to show off my moves, the paranoid feel of someone controlling my every step. I was in a computer game. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of.
And by the way, Max Payne didn't start as the gritty noir story we know today. Early in development, it was pitched more as a straightforward action game with a grizzled cop protagonist. But it went through several pivots, and a lot of its final shape can be attributed to Sam Lake, Remedy's lead writer and the creative force behind Max Payne's world. Lake didn't just write the script, he was Max Payne. I'm being literal here. If you ever wondered why Max has that iconic squint and smirk expression, it's because Sam Lake himself modeled for the character.
Fast forward a couple of years later, and I'm seeing my face everywhere, kind of what was to be known as the constipated Crimis on the cover of the magazines, and the rest is history.
And it doesn't stop there. To bring the world of Max Payne to life, Remedy enlisted their friends, family and co-workers to portray the game's cast. The characters you see in the graphic novel panels are essentially Remedy's family scrapbook. Even the game's main villain, Nicole Horn, was played by Sam Lake's mother.
My mother ended up as the main villain, Nicole Horn. My dad was the shady government official, and my brother was a gangster, and I even got the janitor of the apartment building I was staying at the time to play the Godfather. So it was good fun. Really, really fun.
And honestly, casting your mom as the ruthless, murderous mastermind behind a conspiracy, that's either bold or cathartic. Or maybe a little bit of both.
Sooner or later, it was going to catch up with you.
Mr. Payne, it's time to show you the benefits of my brew. Be a good boy now.
You'd find that Lady Luck was really a hooker. You were fresh out of cash.
But while Sam gave Max his face and his story, it was James McCaffrey who gave him his soul. McCaffrey's performance of Max Payne is nothing short of iconic. His voice, a perfect blend of grit, exhaustion, and dry wit, brought Max to life in a way that a few video game characters had been before. And for many fans, his voice is the most memorable part of Max Payne. Sadly, James McCaffrey passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 65. But his legacy lives on in every haunting monologue and every gravely one-liner. Max Payne wouldn't be the same without him.
Punchinello was a pushover. The moment I stepped into the room, he folded like a deuce before a royal flush.
No, wait. I was just doing what I was told. I couldn't refuse. She's someone high up. Government, maybe. I don't know.
He was trying to buy more sand for his hourglass. I wasn't selling any.
Lastly, I want to mention the music in Max Payne. The game's haunting piano theme has become as iconic as Max himself. It's simple yet powerful. A few melancholy notes that perfectly captured the game's tone of despair and longing. The theme wasn't just a background element. It was a storytelling device, echoing Max's pain in a way words couldn't. And decades later, that theme still sends chills down my spine. And this philosophy of doing more with less extended to the entire game. The team didn't have a budget for flashy, fully animated cutscenes, so they embraced graphic novel panels. They didn't have money to afford professional actors, so they turned to their own community. But instead of feeling like compromises, these choices became part of the game's identity. Max Payne isn't just a product of creativity, it's a product of ingenuity. And above all, Remedy's passion for storytelling shines through in every aspect of the game. They crafted an experience that didn't just let you play as Max Payne, but made you feel his pain, his anger, and his desperation. That commitment to storytelling would go on to define Remedy's future projects. From the eerie psychological horror of Alan Wake to the reality-bending spectacle of Control. But it all started here, with a small Finnish studio that dared to dream big.
This is actually Sam's. He used these detective-style things in real life just to keep kind of track of what's happening, like in the story side. Okay, Alan Wake. Let's see. Like leaves from a dying tree in the fall. Beautiful. Beautiful.
2 decades have passed since Max Payne first hit the shelves, and revisiting it now feels like stepping into a time capsule. In an era where modern gaming is dominated by open worlds, live service titles, and microtransactions, going back to a focused linear experience like Max Payne is almost refreshing. It's a reminder of a time when games weren't just entertainment, they were passion projects, unafraid to experiment and push boundaries. Max Payne isn't just a game, it's a journey, a descent into the mind of a man shattered by loss, driven by revenge, and caught in a spiral of violence that offers no redemption. It's a story that doesn't pull its punches, it's a game that demands you sit with the darkness, so it can sit with you years after you played it. Bullet time mechanics and the graphic novel storytelling are iconic in their own right, but it's not what makes Max Payne timeless. It's the humanity behind it all. Max isn't a superhero. He's not invincible. He's broken, flawed, and desperate. A mirror to the parts of ourselves we'd rather not confront. It's that unflinching honesty that sets Max Payne apart. Remedy Entertainment didn't try to create a game that would make you feel powerful. They created a game that would make you feel. In a medium that often prioritizes escapism, Max Payne leaned into the uncomfortable, forcing you to grapple with the themes of grief, guilt, and the cost of vengeance. And even now, Max Payne holds a unique place in gaming history. At least for me it does. It's not just a relic of its time, it's a reminder of what games can be when a team pours their heart and soul into every frame, every line, every haunting note of the soundtrack. It's the kind of game that stays with you, not just because it was groundbreaking, but because it was deeply, unapologetically human. So whether you played it back in 2001 or are just discovering it now, one thing is certain, Max Payne is unforgettable. And while some games are meant to be experienced once and left behind, Max Payne isn't. Max Payne is the kind of game that's worth revisiting, not just to relive its brilliance, but to remember why it mattered in the first place. I'm glad I replayed it.
After Y2K, the end of the world had become a cliché. But who was I to talk? A brooding underdog avenger alone against an empire of evil, out to right a grave injustice. Everything was subjective. There were only personal apocalypses. Nothing is a cliché when it's happening to you.
If you enjoyed this video, you might like this one, where I went into how GTA 4 feels like a strange anomaly in the Grand Theft Auto series. And as always, thanks for watching.